it was really good that he was mutable and he wanted to, get into it, because otherwise I'd have to look for someone else.
Imagine this. It's a quiet morning in London, nothing out of the ordinary. But behind the scenes, something big is happening. Jimmy Page, the mysterious guitar genius behind Led Zeppelin, has finally decided to open up. Not about fame, not about music, but about something he's never really talked about before. The artists he never got along with, the ones he just couldn't stand. For years, Page stayed out of the drama. While the rest of the band made headlines, he stayed behind the curtain, crafting the sound that made Zeppelin legendary. But that doesn't mean he wasn't paying attention. Behind his calm, quiet image, Page was holding on to some serious grudges. There were moments of betrayal, ego clashes, and deep frustration, stuff he never spoke about. Until now. Some of the names might surprise you. Others might make you look at old rock rivalries in a whole new way. These weren't just musical disagreements. They were personal. Deeply personal. So let's count down the top 6 artists Jimmy Page reportedly hated the most. Some of them were once friends. Some were rivals from day one. But all of them left a mark. Number 6. Eric Clapton, the silent rivalry that cut deep. Let's start with the most famous and intense clash. Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton. In the early days of British rock, Clapton was the untouchable blues hero, the golden boy. And Page, he was the up-and-comer who watched Clapton from the sidelines with admiration at first. But when Clapton left the Yardbirds and Page stepped in, the admiration soured. Suddenly, Page wasn't just the new guy. He was the replacement, and that label haunted him. Critics constantly compared the two. Clapton was seen as the blues purist, while Page dared to experiment, building epic, sprawling soundscapes that would help define Led Zeppelin. Clapton didn't like that. He once called Page's music overblown and too theatrical for someone like Page, who poured his soul into every note. Those words weren't just critiques, they were personal. Page, always the quieter one, never responded in public, but behind the scenes, he carried the sting like a wound. To him, Clapton wasn't just a rival, he was a reminder of how the music world picks favorites. Clapton, with his cool image and critical approval, was the guy the press loved. Page was the wild card, less polished, more mystical, and that difference put them on opposite ends of a very tense spectrum. The rivalry wasn't just about style, it became about legacy. Who would be remembered as the true guitar god? Who had the bigger influence? Fans took sides, journalists fueled the fire, and over time, the two men barely spoke. When they were in the same room, the air turned cold. Eye contact was brief. Smiles were rare. For Page, Clapton represented a kind of gatekeeping, someone who looked down on Zeppelin's magic as if it were a cheap trick. And that kind of judgment sticks with you. Page may never have said it out loud back then, but now, at 81, he's finally letting it slip. Clapton wasn't just a competitor. He was a thorn in the side, a name that still carries weight and resentment. Number 5. Jeff Beck, brothers in sound, strangers in silence. Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page started out like brothers. They were young, hungry, and deeply connected through music. In their early days, they shared everything, from guitar licks to late-night dreams in cramped studios. They even played in the Yardbirds together for a short time, and their combined guitar skills were like lightning in a bottle. But as their careers exploded, something shifted. What once was camaraderie turned into cold rivalry. It wasn't one dramatic fight that ended their bond. It was the slow burn of ego, competition, and unspoken resentment. When Beck left the Yardbirds and Page took over, there were whispers that Page had slid into his spot a little too smoothly. Beck never openly accused him, but Page could feel the tension grow. Over time, Beck's sideways glances, subtle comments in interviews, and the awkward silences between them spoke louder than any headline. They never aired their dirty laundry in public, but their rivalry hung heavy in the air. Friends noticed the chill whenever their names were brought up in the same conversation. When they ran into each other backstage at festivals or award shows, their meetings were brief and uncomfortable. They didn't argue. They didn't have to. Every nod, every cold shoulder, every missing invitation said enough. What made it worse was how much they had in common. Both were pushing the limits of guitar music, exploring new sounds, experimenting with distortion, and redefining what rock could be. They were on parallel paths, and maybe that was the problem. There was only room for one pioneer in the spotlight, and both of them wanted to be it. Page felt the pain of that silent rivalry. To him, Beck represented what could have been: a lifelong creative partner, a fellow traveler in the wild frontier of rock. Instead, they became like distant planets in the same orbit, always close, but never quite touching. The friendship faded, the music moved on, and the silence between them became permanent. Page never forgot the bond they once had, or the cold distance that replaced it. Number 4. Pete Townsend, the mockery that left a mark. Pete Townsend was never one to hold back. Loud, brash, and always armed with a biting remark, whose legendary guitarist had no problem speaking his mind, and Jimmy Page knew it. From the start, Townsend made it clear he didn't think much of Led Zeppelin. While fans were blown away by their thunderous sound and mystic stage presence, Townsend saw it all as over-the-top and pretentious. He didn't just roll his eyes. He mocked them. He called their music derivative, accused them of stealing the thunder of others and dressing it up in wizard cloaks and guitar solos. And Page, he didn't respond, not with words anyway. He let the silence do the talking. But behind that quiet exterior, the insults cut deep. For Page, Zeppelin wasn't just about rebellion or showmanship. It was about something primal. He believed their music channeled something elemental, ancient, even magical. To be dismissed as theatrical fluff stung more than he ever let on. He didn't care about being liked, but being misunderstood by a fellow rock icon, that hit a nerve. Their rare encounters in public were like ice and fire. Townsend would crack a joke. Page would smile thinly. They didn't need to argue. The air between them carried the weight of their mutual disdain. Fans and insiders could feel it. You didn't need a backstage pass to see that these two legends were never going to see eye to eye. What made it worse was that Townsend's words had power. He wasn't just any critic. He was a peer. His digs made people question Zeppelin's authenticity. And for Page, who had worked so hard to build something unique, it felt like sabotage. He carried that grudge for years, not loudly, but quietly, like a shadow always following him. Townsend may have thought he was just being honest, but to Page, it felt like betrayal from someone who should have known better. Page never forgot the bond they once had, or the cold distance that replaced it. Number 3. Richie Blackmore, a mirror too close for comfort. Jimmy Page and Richie Blackmore never had a loud feud, but that didn't make it any less real. In fact, the silence between them was part of what made their rivalry so intense. Both men were guitar gods of the 1970s, each leading legendary bands, Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, each pushing the limits of hard rock, and each constantly compared to the other. That constant comparison, it built a wall of quiet resentment. They never toured together. They rarely shared a stage, but their names were often side by side in magazines, reviews, and heated fan debates. People would argue who played faster, who was more innovative, who was the real king of heavy rock. And while Page publicly stayed diplomatic, deep down, he felt the tension. Blackmore had a darker energy, more serious, more brooding. And to Page, it felt like looking at a version of himself that had taken a different, colder path. There was no open hostility, but the unspoken rivalry was always in the room. When they did cross paths backstage or at industry events, the interactions were brief and stiff, nods, maybe a handshake, but no real warmth. They weren't enemies, but they definitely weren't friends. Page sensed Blackmore's suspicion, the kind of tension where every guitar solo felt like a statement, every interview answer like a veiled jab. And Blackmore, he wasn't the type to hide his disdain if he felt someone was copying or one-upping him. Some fans even started accusing each guitarist of borrowing from the other, which only made things worse. To Page, this wasn't just a case of artistic competition. It was a ghostly standoff. Two men walking the same road, glancing at each other from opposite sides, never crossing paths for long, but always aware of the other's presence. It was emotional, personal, and exhausting. A cold war with six strings and egos. In the end, Page viewed Blackmore not as a villain, but as a reminder that greatness often comes with shadows. And sometimes, the closest rivals are the ones you never truly confront, but never quite forget. Number 2. John Lennon, the Beatle who cut deep without trying. Jimmy Page never expected to clash with John Lennon. After all, they weren't chasing the same spotlight. Lennon was a Beatle, an icon of peace and poetry. Page was the dark sorcerer of rock, crafting epic soundscapes with Led Zeppelin. They weren't in competition musically, but that didn't stop Lennon from taking shots. And Page felt every single one. During and after the Beatles' era, Lennon often mocked heavy rock. He called it crude, lacking finesse, even dumb. And while he didn't name Page specifically, everyone knew who he was talking about. Zeppelin was the face of that loud, bombastic sound Lennon claimed to detest. To Page, who believed Zeppelin's music had real depth and purpose, Lennon's comments were more than criticism. They were dismissals. Arrogant, elitist, and worse, coming from a man worshipped around the world. They crossed paths occasionally, at award shows, industry events, private parties. Lennon, always sharp with his tongue, would throw out casual digs. Page would say nothing, just smile that tight, unreadable smile of his. But inside, he was seething, being torn down by a legend, especially in front of peers, stung like betrayal. Page started calling Lennon a snob in private circles, someone who wore a mask, preaching peace but wielding words like weapons. What made it hurt more was the public image Lennon carried, the wise sage, the enlightened soul. But Page had seen the other side, the sarcasm, the condescension, the sly remarks meant to put others in their place. He didn't see a peaceful visionary. He saw a man who judged what he didn't understand, who looked down on Zeppelin as if they were beneath him. Page never retaliated publicly. He kept his cool as always. But the bitterness lingered for decades. Lennon may not have meant his words to wound, but they did, deeply. And for Page, the sting of being dismissed by a Beatle never truly went away. Number 1. Keith Richards, the grudge that never died. Of all Jimmy Page's quiet feuds, his tension with Keith Richards might be the most cutting and the most personal. Unlike the fiery outbursts of other rock rivalries, this one simmered in the background for years, fed by sly comments, cold shoulders, and a steady stream of mockery from the Rolling Stones' legendary guitarist. Richards never liked Led Zeppelin. That much was clear. While fans worshipped their epic performances and mythic sound, Richards shrugged it all off as self-indulgent noise. He called them pompous, theatrical, even ridiculous. Page's mystic symbols, long solos, and dark stage presence? To Richards, it was all smoke and mirrors. Publicly, he joked. Privately, it was clear. He didn't respect what Page had built. But Page didn't see the jabs as jokes. He saw them as subtle sabotage. While Zeppelin was shaping the future of rock, Richards was downplaying it at every turn. And because Richards was so influential, his words mattered. Critics picked up on them. Fans started echoing them. Slowly, they chipped away at Zeppelin's image, just enough to make Page feel like someone was always trying to knock him down. To make matters worse, this wasn't just a critic talking. It was another guitar legend, a peer. And that kind of criticism hits different. Page didn't fire back in interviews. He stayed quiet. But inside, the frustration grew, especially during his darker years, when addiction and personal demons clouded his life. Those old insults echoed louder. Page began to see Richards not just as a rival, but as a force working against him. The rare times they were in the same room, you could feel the tension. Richards would smirk or say something snide. Page would stay cool, smile politely, but the chill between them was unmistakable. No shouting, no fights, just a long, slow freeze that never thawed. In Page's eyes, Richards wasn't just dismissive, he was deliberately cruel. And over time, that quiet feud became one of the deepest scars in his long career. Not because Richards yelled the loudest, but because he kept digging with a grin. When we think of legends like Jimmy Page, it's easy to picture the spotlight, the screaming fans, and the timeless music. But behind every icon is a real person, one who faced pressure, judgment, and complicated relationships, just like anyone else. Page wasn't just crafting riffs that defined an era. He was also navigating a world full of egos, expectations, and people who didn't always have his back. These rivalries weren't always loud or public, but they shaped him. Some were rooted in competition, others in deep disappointment. And now, after decades of silence, Page has finally let us see a glimpse of what he carried all these years. If you found this dive into rock history as fascinating as we did, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments. Which rivalry surprised you the most? And who should we cover next? Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep the music loud and the legends alive.